Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Racial Bias, Conscious and Unconscious. This free CLE program is made possible by a grant from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, whose generous support in the last few years has enabled NACDL to produce free training programs for public defense providers across our country. These programs are a part of the broader effort on behalf of NACDL to support public defense nationwide through training, advocacy, policy, and reform. And if you're not already a member of NACDL, we encourage you all to join NACDL. We have been really working hard to join our public defense community, to join other people that have like-minded issues and support, and we'll work together. If you want to receive CLE for today's program, please refer to the CLE code that will be present during the course of this program. Our webinar today is featuring Gina Pruski, who many of you know, who is the training director for the state of Wisconsin's Public Defender's Office. Gina's been with the Wisconsin State Public Defender since 1992, first as a staff attorney and then later as the agency's deputy legal counsel, where she performed legislative liaison duties on behalf of the Wisconsin State Public Defender's Office. As everyone that's watching this webinar knows, we have over 2.2 million people that are incarcerated in this country. 4.7 million people are on probation and parole. And we know that our criminal legal system is replete with racial and ethnic disparities. Racial bias, both conscious and unconscious, results in more people of color being stopped, searched, arrested, convicted, and imprisoned more than any time in our history. This was highlighted this past week by Justice Sotomayor's brilliant dissent in Utah versus Strieff. And we as criminal defense practitioners and public defenders are not immune to racial biases that we need to really be in touch with. And that's what Gina's going to talk to us about today. For the last few years, Gina has really worked on this issue. She's received extensive training in the area of racial justice facilitation. And in addition to training her defenders on racial bias, she participates in many activities to foster a community of inclusion in her state. I heard Gina speak about this about 2 months ago in a national training program, and it was just such an important topic that we're really delighted to be able to share that with you all today. She's here today to talk to you about the comprehensive racial bias training that she conducted with the Wisconsin State Public Defender's Office. And she's going to talk to you all about how she developed this training, the substance of the training, and so that it can be replicated in other jurisdictions throughout the country. One of the things that I love about Gina and a lot of the National Public Defender trainers is that they really want to share the knowledge that they have been gaining through the work that they've been doing in their own jurisdictions. So if you want to start a similar training program in your state, and she's going to walk through the different steps that she had done during the course of this year-long program, a year-long program she did in Wisconsin, please do not hesitate to call Gina. All of her contact information is available, and we will, at the end of this presentation, Gina will share that with you as well. We really want to encourage you to ask questions. If at any point during the course of this webinar you have any questions, please email Diane Price at dprice@nacdl.org, and we'll be reading the questions to Gina, and she will answer them during the course of the webinar. I'm very delighted to bring you Gina Pruski.
Thanks, Colette. Thanks, Colette, for that really nice introduction. And on behalf of the Wisconsin State Public Defender's Office, thank you for inviting me here today to talk about the training that we have been doing. As Colette mentioned, for the last year, we've been doing training specifically on implicit bias, unconscious bias. But we started doing this kind of training actually about 4 years ago, back in 2012. And even before that, the Wisconsin SPD kind of engaged in some other efforts to look at the issue of racial disparity. And so what I'm going to talk about today are the specific things that we've been doing in Wisconsin related to racial disparity and unconscious bias, including training, including appointing a racial and ethnic disparity practice coordinator in our agency. We have a racial disparity team and a whole lot of other things going on. So And at the end of the webinar, I'm going to talk a little bit about things that just, we as individual lawyers and individual people can do to kind of take a look at our own unconscious bias. And there are things that, that we can do just day to day, pretty simple things that can help us just recognize our own biases and then hopefully do things so we don't act on those biases. So basically, a lot of this started back in 2008. Our agency in Wisconsin is governed by a 9-member board of directors. And in 2008, our SPD board adopted a resolution specifically asking the agency to engage in efforts to deal with racial disparity. And partly what prompted it was Wisconsin was like the worst, or like either the worst or the second worst state in the nation when it came to disproportionate minority confinement. Not just confinement, but just contact with the police too, and the number of arrests, the number, the charges, the prosecutions, and then the imprisonment of people of color. It was way disproportionate to the population in Wisconsin. And so our board decided, our agency, as public defenders, and because so many of our clients are people of color, we need to do something about this. So the board specifically asked us to do that, and a couple things came about as a result of it. Specifically, we adopted or created a racial disparity team in the agency. And at the time, so this would have been 2008, at the time our agency was being run by Nick Charkis. He retired about 5 years ago, but he decided, okay, you know what, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a team of people within the agency who are interested in working on this issue, and we'll, make sure that we give the support that we need to team members to do, individual things to deal with racial disparities. So I think we ended up getting so our agency has about 600 staff statewide. We've got 38 offices located around Wisconsin. We are a statewide public defender system. And I think when the team was first created in 2008, I think we had about maybe 100, 150 individual staff members sign up and say, hey, I want to be a part of this team. This is an important issue, and I want to work on this. And so some of the things that the team looked at were things like, litigation strategies. How can we litigate these issues in individual cases? Is there impact litigation that we can do? What sort of education and training, can we do within our agency itself, or within the community, or with policymakers? What kind of data do we need to address racial disparity challenges, in court, and that kind of thing. So that kind of got things going in Wisconsin, and it was a real clear message from our agency leadership that, this is an important issue. And you know what, staff, if you want to take, if you're going to take time out of your day to work on this, that's okay, because this is something that's important to us as an agency. And so that got things going, and then shortly after that, and I think it was about 2010 or so, our agency appointed one of our staff lawyers to be the racial and ethnic disparity practice coordinator, and she's actually an attorney manager who works in our Racine office, and part of her job is to work with individual lawyers and others in our agency if they've got a specific issue in their case where they want to raise a challenge based on race. She will help them gather the data and write the motion and that kind of thing. She's also been very involved in our training efforts, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And again, that was sort of like another thing that our agency did that really showed that this is an important issue for us as an agency, and we've got this team, and now we've got this practice coordinator position that is going to devote she's going to devote some of her time each day to this issue. So that kind of got things going. And in terms of the training, the very first thing that we did was we did these racial bias discussion circles, and we rolled these out in, I think it was 2012, is when we rolled these out around the state. And for those of you who don't know what discussion circles are, what they are, literally, and here's what they look like. It's like a group of people literally sitting in a circle and talking about an issue, okay? One person speaks at a time, and you typically will have a like a talking piece or talking stick, and the person holding the talking piece is the only one who can talk in that moment. And so what we did is we first wanted to figure out, okay, who's going to facilitate? Because when you do these talking circles, you have maybe like 8 to 10 people in a circle, and you want to have at least one person facilitate the circle. And so the first step that we did in developing the discussion circles was go and select a number of our staff to be facilitators, okay? And so again, we have about 600 or so staff statewide, and there were a number of people who were interested in doing this, but we wanted to be really careful about who we selected as facilitators. And we wanted to make sure that the people who did this had, I guess sort of like not only the energy and the passion to be involved in this, because this is something that they're going to have to do on top of their work, right? I mean, this, they don't get any caseload relief or any workload relief to participate as a facilitator in the discussion circles. So they had to have the energy and the motivation and the passion to want to do this. Several of the people that we selected as facilitators actually came to the public defenders with some prior experience or education and training in the area of racial justice facilitation, which was very helpful. And the other thing that we wanted to make sure in selecting the facilitators was that they had the right mindset or personality or the right mindset to be a facilitator, because what we found when we did the circles was, people are going to say things that other people might find offensive, right? And so if you're the facilitator, you don't want to make the situation worse, right? So you want to be the kind of person and that can, facilitate the discussion and make everyone comfortable, first of all, to, say what they really want to say. And then if things get, a little uncomfortable or whatever, have the skill necessary to, get things back on track and to keep that discussion going. It was important that the facilitators also were people who were good listeners and who are able to remain neutral, because, as public defenders, it's hard when you hear something. I know it's taken me years to develop my game face, you hear someone say something, you're just like, what? And no, when you're facilitating something like this, you can't do that. So that was the first thing. And in the beginning, I think we selected about 20 people statewide, and that was both lawyers and other staff within our agency as well. We wanted to make sure that we had a good cross-section of positions, so attorneys, investigators, legal secretaries, client services specialists. And we also wanted to make sure that we had an equal mix of people of color and white people, because what we decided we would do when we rolled the circles out was have each circle facilitated by 2 people, one a person of color and one a white person. And that was intentional because we knew, unfortunately, in some parts of our agency and in some parts of our state, the circles might be all white people, and we wanted to make sure that a person of color's perspective was shared and heard as well. So that's what we did, and then in terms of selection. And then what we did is we wanted them all to get some training in the area of facilitation, and facilitation in the area of discussing race in particular. So what our agency did was we partnered with the YWCA of Madison, a great organization in Madison. Their mission is two sole things, two things: empowering women and eliminating racism. So they have this whole unit at the YWCA in Madison devoted to eliminating racism. They've got a ton of, training and resources. And so we called them up and we said, hey, we want to do these racial bias discussion circles. Can you help us, develop questions for these and give our facilitators training and give us what we, need to make these successful? And they were like, yeah, definitely. We would love to help you. So what we had our 20 facilitators do back in 2012, before we rolled out the circles, is we had each of them participate in these racial justice workshops that the YWCA does on a regular basis. And it's a series of workshops. There's 3 of them, and each of them is a day long. They're pretty intense. Each day focuses on a different issue. So, for example, one of the days focuses solely on privilege and what that is and how that appears. A lot of it, another day will focus on a lot of the history and how institutional racism and the history and how it continues to play out today. So we had our 20 facilitators go through these 3 workshops, again, very intense, and then we brought the Y in to conduct a facilitator training for our 20 facilitators, and then worked with the Y on developing the questions for the circles. So the way the circles work then is, like I said, we'd have like 8 to 10 people sitting in a circle, 2 facilitators, one a person of color, 1 a white person, and then we had 5 questions that were asked, and each person in the circle would go around and answer the question if they chose. You can pass if you want. Before the circle starts, though, what we had people do is agree to certain guidelines, like use I statements. Oh gosh, I don't remember what all of them are, but everyone had to agree to certain guidelines as part of participating in the circle. And then the facilitator would ask the first question. And so, for example, the first question was combating racism one of the reasons that you came to work for the Wisconsin Public Defender's Office? And then, the facilitator would answer that question, however they want to answer. And then the next person sitting in the circle would take the talking piece and then answer the question. And it was interesting because I think we conducted the circles maybe 15 to 20 times around the state, and in each location around the state we may have had like anywhere from like 2 to maybe 8 circles going on at a time as well in different rooms. And it was interesting because our group of facilitators would check in with each other, after each time that we, did the circles in a specific location. And one of the things that we had to keep reminding ourselves was, sometimes we'd get frustrated if people didn't give the answer we thought they should give. So, like, for example, was combating racism one of the reasons you came to work for the Wisconsin Public Defender's Office? My answer was no, it wasn't. It wasn't a reason. I came to work for the SPD, for different reasons. And so when others, might answer that question that way or show lack of knowledge or whatever about certain issues related to race, some of our facilitators would get really frustrated. It's like, oh God, can't they see that? It's like, no, it's okay. As part of as part of these discussion circles, you have to allow people to just answer how they're going to answer, and we as facilitators just listen and then keep the discussion going. And the whole point of the racial bias discussion circles was really pretty simple. It was just to get people comfortable talking about race, right? So the question, that first question was combating racism, one of the reasons you came to work for SPD, is a pretty, relatively mild question, right? And pretty simple to answer. And so that was the sole purpose, just getting people comfortable talking about race, and knowing in our heads that we're going to take this further, and this is like a first, a good first step. And fortunately, that's what we found out was, in getting some feedback about the circles, what people told us was these were great. This, it really opened my eyes to some of my coworkers' life experiences, and it's made me think about things in a different way. And for example, one of the questions that was asked as part of the circles was about white privilege. What does white privilege mean to you, and how does it show up in your life? And that seemed to be a question that people really learned a lot about themselves and about their coworkers. And so what happened after the circles was our staff said, hey, we want more of this stuff. We want, these were great. It got us talking to each other and a little bit more comfortable talking to each other about how we feel about certain things. But you know what? We need more training on what do we do, like when a judge or a DA or my mother or somebody says something that's, really offensive. What do I do in that situation? So what we did then was developed our second program, and this was about 2014, and what we called this one was Responding to Racism Effectively: Engagement, Empathy, and Education. Okay, and so what this program was to address the desire that staff had at that time, which was how do we intervene? How do we respond when, someone says something? So what this one was it was a half-day program, and we got our facilitators together to help us develop it because they had that sort of base knowledge and that interest and that motivation to do it. And what we ended up developing was a half-day training that mostly involved people breaking up into groups of like 2 or 3 and talking about a specific scenario, okay? And I think we developed maybe 12 or 13 different scenarios, and people in their small, in their pair, their small group would talk about, how would I respond? And then we would come together as a large group and everyone would share. But before we got to that point, we talked a lot with the group about, thinking about, the context. Are you at work? Is this your supervisor who's saying something? Or is this your grandmother at Christmas dinner? Is this a stranger in a store doing something that you find offensive? What's the context? That was one thing that we had a lot of discussion about. The other thing that we had a lot of discussion about was, what's the goal? Right? If you're gonna say something, or you're gonna intervene, or you're gonna respond in some way, what's your goal? Is your goal simply to let that person know that you're offended by what they just said? And if that's your goal, okay, then your response might be one thing, right? Is your goal to understand where that person's coming from, as they said or did whatever it was that they said or did? And if that's your goal, how are you going to respond that way? Is your goal to bring awareness to this person that what they're doing is offensive or might be offensive? If so, how would you respond? Is your goal to educate the person a little bit about, about the issue? Again, and what would your response be? And what we did with this program, and I have to give a lot of kudos to one of our staff members. She runs our private bar division. She had the courage to share a story where one of our new staff, actually in the training office, he doesn't work with us anymore, but he was brand new to our office and came in early on his very first day of work, a young African-American male. And he came into the office and he was walking back toward where he knew his desk was. And unfortunately, I wasn't there to greet him. I, wasn't there at the moment. But this division director saw him and she asked him what he was doing there. And she shares the story as part of our training. And she says, I went up to him and I asked him what he was doing there, and I assumed he was a client. And she was mortified when she found out that he was a new staff member of our office. And so she had the guts to go in, we did a little 5-minute videotape of her, and as we rolled out this Responding to Racism program, her story was shared with everyone. And we used her story as sort of a jumping off place to get kind of the discussion going. Okay, now if you had heard her say this to to him, what would you have done? Kind of to start getting people thinking about, like, and some people are like, well, well, she didn't know. I mean, what, and like to, all the way from that to like, oh my God, that's terrible. Like, what, how could you have said that to him or whatever? So, and I'm going to talk a little bit more later too about the importance, I think, of making ourselves vulnerable and sharing our own stories about, things that we do, because that's something that, like, that a lot of us facilitators have been doing in these trainings. So anyway, so that program started out that way with her sharing that story, and then people, talking about, like, if you had been there and saw her do that, what would you have said to her? Some people said, I wouldn't have done anything, all the way to like, oh my God, I would have went up to her and said, like, how could you have done that? That's terrible. To, okay, well, let's have a discussion about what her response might have been then, back. And then moving into those scenarios that I talked about. And, so one of the things that we, another thing that we did with this program was, so here's an example of a scenario. You're driving through town with your aunt in the passenger seat. And as you're stopped at a red light, you notice there's an African-American man walking down on the same side as your car, walking down the street on the same side of your car. And your aunt asks you to lock the door. So that was an example of one of the scenarios that we had in this training, okay? And so people would discuss in their group, this was my aunt, this is what I would do. And again, taking into consideration, what's the context, right? It's your aunt, you're in the car, and what's your goal, okay? And so, and then talking specifically about things that you might say. So if you're going to intervene or you're going to respond to your aunt in this situation, what would you say? Okay? And then we, would come back together as a large group. And one of the things that we did not allow, people to do, we didn't let people off the hook. So, someone would say, well, if I'm in the car with my aunt and I don't know, I would just, very kindly, ask my aunt, like, what was that about? It's like, no. Like, exactly how would you say it? Like, stand up, share with the group exactly how you would say it, when you would say it, what's your tone of voice, do all of that. And then we would do a little bit of role playing, and someone would play the part of the aunt and respond or whatever. And then, and then that would kind of get people thinking a little bit more about, that context and the goal and what your specific words are going to be and your tone of voice and all of that. And so that was our Responding to Racism program. I just have some pictures, like, kind of woven in here from some of these programs that we did. Okay, so we had the circles that we did in 2012. That was sort of like the ground level, right? Just pretty, 90-minute discussion circle, right? Where the whole goal is just to get people comfortable talking about race. Next level was the, how do we intervene? How do we respond when we see people doing something that we find racially offensive or saying something racially offensive? How can we respond or intervene? That was, the next level. Then we get into, most recently, and this started about a year or so ago, into looking inward, okay? So it's like, yes, it's pretty easy to say, these other people are racist or, whatever. But we have to look at ourselves too, right? And especially as public defenders, like, we of all people should not be engaged, allowing our biases and things, affect how we work with our clients. And so this was like the next step. We thought, okay, now we're going to do the self-reflective training, and it's, this is where we need to be next. So what we did with this, again, we worked with our facilitators, and I should mention that while, back in 2012, we, recruited or selected the 20 people to facilitate, we've had people leave the agency since then, and so we are continuously selecting new facilitators and people to help work with us on developing all of our training. And again, they still need to go through that, facilitator training and the racial justice workshops through the WISE. So the next level, implicit bias or unconscious bias, and looking inward. All right. So this was the next program. Yes.
Gina, you got a question, and
Yeah.
I just wanted to point it out. One of the folks watching had asked you what were the 5 questions during the
Yes.
first facilitation.
Yeah. I actually have them.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. All right, so the first question for the circles was combating racism something that inspired you to work with the SPD? And if so, please describe your motivation and experience. All right, so that was question 1. Question 2 was, can our agency's work change an individual's racist attitudes and behavior, or does change only happen in one-on-one, person-to-person interactions? The third question was, what, if anything, stops you from talking about your own personal racial biases in racially mixed company? The fourth question is, what does the phrase white privilege mean to you, and how does it affect you personally? And then the last question was, what do you think people of color want individual white people to do about racial discrimination that people of color experience? And it was kind of funny because, like, one of the things after we developed the questions, like, we knew these were the questions that we wanted to ask. There was a lot of thought put into the order of the questions, and so we decided, like, the white privilege question, we didn't want that to be the first question out of the gate. We thought we would just kind of build up. But we wanted to make sure that the white privilege question was answered, because another thing that we found, we wanted to keep the circle discussions limited to about 90 minutes, just in being respectful of people's time. And sometimes we wouldn't get through all 5 questions in that 90 minutes, so we thought, well, we want to do the white privilege question, so we're going to make that question 4, but we didn't want to put it at the beginning because that was the one that sort of got more of a reaction from people. So those were the 5 questions.
And Gina, I just wanted to point out that those are available in the materials that are linked
Yes.
to the webinar. The other question that was asked was, you had talked about doing some of the training through the YWCA in Wisconsin. Does the YWCA offer that type of programming in other places in this country? Do you know?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I don't know. I can refer people to the YWCA of Madison's website. Colleen Butler is their racial justice director there, and she might know if otherwise around the country do something similar. So
thank you.
Yeah, and I get travel and things, but I don't think that their workshops are limited to Wisconsin people. I mean, I think if somebody wanted to come and participate in those, and they're awesome, and part of the, I should have mentioned too, part of the reasoning behind sending our facilitators to those 3 very intensive workshops was for them to really observe and soak in how the facilitators in those workshops facilitated those workshops, because they're pretty intense. And so, not only going through facilitator training, but actually seeing how really experienced facilitators conduct themselves over, 3 heavy, days of training. So, they're a phenomenal organization.
It is, and it is. We just looked it up, and it is online on the Madison, Wisconsin YWCA. So there's a link to the racial justice online class as well.
Yeah. All right. So so phase 3, the implicit bias or unconscious bias. What that program really focused on was, or is, and we're still sort of doing a modified version of it right now, was really, what is unconscious bias? What is implicit bias? Where does it come from? And, and how does it affect, our behaviors and our decisions and our actions? And, what can we do to change it? Because there are actually things that we can do to change it. And we focused a lot on the brain science. It's really, there's like a ton of stuff out there. If you just Google unconscious bias or implicit bias, millions of things are going to come up. So we did a lot of reading, a lot of research, a lot of talking with people about it, and then from that developed a training program, half-day training program, focused specifically on unconscious bias and what it is, and getting people to really think about, like, wow, what, okay, this is what it is, and what, I have it too, and really kind of convincing people that, we all have it, and it's, and don't like hate yourself because you have it, because we all have it, because we all have brains, and it's really, rooted in brain biology, and it really comes from just, our daily existence from birth. We're bombarded with images and things all over the place, in the media, in our interactions with other people, our family makeup, everything really can impact, what biases we have. So that was really the focus of that program, was to get, people to understand, what it is, and to, admit and accept that, we all have it, even public defenders, okay? And so what I want to do now is I actually want to show a video. This video, maybe some of you out there have seen it. It's called Silent Beats. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah, so it's called Silent Beats. It's about 5.5 minutes long, and we use this video in our unconscious bias training. So I'm just going to play it. I'm going to let you guys watch it, and then I can talk a little bit more about it. Okay, so we show this video as part of the implicit bias training that we developed, because we think it's a great example, a great illustration of what implicit bias is, right? And I can't believe, I guess this video was made by someone when he was in college. It's like, wow, it's like, I think it's outstanding. Because as you can see from the video, everyone in the video has their biases about the other people, right? And so what we do is we show the video, and then we have a discussion with the group about, okay, what was going on here, what were the stereotypes or the assumptions that each person made about the other people, how did it affect their actions and their behaviors, what were those actions and behaviors, and and it's just sort of like everyone assumes that the white elderly woman, isn't going to do anything, and what she's the one at the end who steals the candy bar, right? And so, so we use this video in this training, and just to have a discussion about what is implicit bias, and here it is, right here in a video. So this implicit bias training. As I was mentioning, it's like a half day, really very self-reflective piece training where we're looking inward. And so what we did in 2015, basically offered that program to our agency support staff. And then what we did for the lawyers is we built in sort of like an afternoon session for them to focus on some litigation components, all right, and how we might raise implicit bias in the context of 3 specific areas in our cases. One being jury selection, another being stop motions, and then the last being plea negotiations. And so it just so happens that we finished rolling out this program, and we actually kind of renamed it a little bit. We liked the phrase bias informed. I mean, some of you out there probably have heard about trauma informed, and how we need as lawyers and as people working with people who have suffered trauma, the things that we do to help them, we need to be trauma informed. So it's the same thing with this. We need to be bias informed, right? We need to know how our biases, not only other people in the system, like the police and judges and prosecutors, and how their bias informs their decisions, but how our own biases inform what we do with our clients. So we really like the title, A Bias-Informed Approach to Public Defender Advocacy. And so we just finished rolling out 9 of these sessions around the state. We did them in April, May, and June. And the morning really focused on the self-reflection stuff, and we invited all staff to the morning, and then the lawyers were invited to stay in the afternoon, where we focused on those 3 areas: jury selection, plea negotiations, and stop motions. And one of the things that we also incorporated in addition to that Silent Beats video is an article that was written by Song Richardson, who probably many of you know who she is, about public defender, implicit racial bias in public defender triage. And I don't know if I included the link to that, Colette, but
we'll make it available.
Okay.
I'll contact Song and make sure that we can share that with the
Okay,
audience.
great, yeah. We've asked our staff to read that article, and because it is wonderful. It's really causes people to think, because I think sometimes we public defenders think, well, we're public defenders, no way, we don't have these biases, we don't make assumptions, and we don't stereotype, we don't do these things. Well, yeah, we do, because all humans do that. And Song's article does a really wonderful job about really, causing us to think about, like, okay, so am I spending less time with my clients of color? Am I not devoting as many resources to my clients of color as my white clients? What am I doing? And she talks about specific studies that have been done in other contexts, about how, if ambiguous behavior or facial expressions with people of color, how white people might interpret them as hostile when really it's not. So if a person of color does one thing, we react one way, versus if a white person did it the same thing, we would react a different way and look at that behavior more favorably, and look at it more unfavorably if it's a person of color. So it really makes you think. And so we talk about Song's article in this training with our lawyers, and get our lawyers to really talk about and think about, are they doing things different with clients of color versus white clients? And if so, what is that about? And, you really need to think about that. And so that training includes that component as well. And then the different areas of litigation. So what we did with the jury selection piece, a lot of people have probably heard about Judge Mark Bennett from Iowa. He's a federal judge in Iowa. He has done a lot of work around the area of unconscious bias with his juror orientation and jury instructions. And we actually have a lot of his stuff posted at our agency's website, at the SPD website. I didn't include it as part of this, but if people want to go to the Wisconsin SPD website, it's there. And we called Judge Bennett, and we told him that we were going to do these 9 trainings around the state this past spring, and we said, hey, we would love to know what specifically you're doing. But obviously we can't invite you to come 9 times to Wisconsin to do this, so can we just get a videotape of you somehow? And he was so cooperative and so gracious. He created his own little videotape for us, and so we've got this 30-minute video. Again, it's at the Public Defender's website, where we one of us, my coworker Peter's in the background, and he's asking him questions. So you can hear Peter on the phone asking Judge Bennett questions, and then Judge Bennett, answers the questions and basically talks very specifically about what he does to educate jurors about implicit bias. And he's got a couple of videos that he uses. He has a juror pledge that he has jurors sign, basically, pledging that they will not allow their unconscious biases to affect their decision. He has a very, specific jury instruction that he's drafted that he uses on all of his trials, and he's shared all of that with us and talks about all of those things in this video. And so we wove that into our training, basically, to let our lawyers then know, hey, there is this judge out there who does this stuff, and he even goes around the country and educates circuit court and appellate court judges on unconscious bias and the importance of educating jurors about it, and educating judges about their own biases as well. And so that is a component of the training. we, in terms of what we do with stop motions, so we talk specifically about, or well, let me back up. So the jury selection piece, we show the Judge Mark Bennett video, and then we have a discussion with the group about things that, individual lawyers in the room, because it's not, just us as trainers who've got ideas. Everybody sitting in the room has tried stuff, or a lot of people have tried stuff, right? And so we get a discussion going about, what have you used and how did it work for you? And, sometimes it doesn't work out so well, and, sometimes it does. And then it's about, gives other people in the room ideas about what they can do. And so we do that with the jury selection piece. Then we move on to traffic stops and pedestrian stops. And we talk specifically about, what the law is in Wisconsin, how you raise this motion, what the standard is, what the law is, what kind of data is going to be needed to support your motion. Where you can turn for support or help to gather that data or analyze that data and help, write that motion. And that kind of goes back to the practice coordinator position that we have. And then again, we talk with the group about things that they've done. Have you litigated these motions, and, and how did it turn out for you? And then the last piece is the plea negotiations with prosecutors. And we kind of do the same thing that we did in that other program I was talking about, where we sort of role play and say, okay, well, what if your DA says, wait, are you calling me a racist? Well, how would you respond in that situation? Or how might you bring up your concern that there might be, some bias coming into play? So we do that. The other thing that we wove into this program, and I'll talk a little bit more about this at the end, but is, again, those what we call staff stories. So I mentioned the one where the division director, made an assumption about the new staff person and that he was a client and not a staff person. Those kind of stories. But what we wove into this program that we just rolled out this past spring is we got several of our staff to share specific instances where they did raise race in a case, and to talk about, some of their fear, trepidation in doing that, how they overcame that, and then how it turned out, and what sort of they learned from that, and what advice they have for their colleagues in doing kind of the same thing. And one of the staff in our Milwaukee office tells a great story about a case. His client was charged with resisting, and there's a dash cam video, classic resisting case where, guy's not letting the cops, cuff him, and he escapes and he runs away, and, he gets charged with resisting. And, one of the things that the staff lawyer shares is that, and he doesn't say it quite this way, he says it better than I'm about to say it, but, had he let his bias get in the way of really sitting down with that client and listening to that client and asking the client questions about, why did you run from the police? What was going through your head? What were you feeling in that moment? Had he not done those things, he would not have gotten to what really was going on in his client's head, which was, I'm terrified of the police. I'm a young black man in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and people like me get killed, by the police. And the police weren't telling me why I was being arrested. They refused to answer my questions about, what's going on? Why are you cuffing me? Why did you stop? What's going on? And because of that, he was terrified, and he ran. And ultimately, what happened in this case was it was a hung jury. Okay, and it's a great example of the need, for public defenders to not, let that filter, let our, my life view, as a white person might be like, oh gosh, if the police are going to come to me, I'm going to cooperate and they're going to cuff me and I'm not going to ask any questions. I'm just going to assume that they're acting within lawful authority and I'm going to do my thing, right? Well, this particular client's life experience is completely different. And this lawyer, and he's a new lawyer too, which is like so inspiring, took the time to really sit down and ask his client those questions, like, what was going on? Talk to me. What was this about? And because of that, he was able to, put his client on the stand, get that story out there, and then the jury came back, was a hung jury. So those stories, we decided, these videotapes of staff sharing what they've done in specific cases, we thought was important because it seems as though when you hear about your your colleagues doing something, it really inspires you and motivates you to be like, I totally want to do that too. And that's what we're finding is in these trainings, people leave like, oh my God, that Judge Bennett, what he's doing, I'm totally going to do that, and we've heard from staff after these trainings that, yes, I'm talking to my prosecutor right now and I'm hopeful that he's going to agree that we can use some of the, the jury instructions and the juror pledge and the things that Judge Bennett are doing, we're going to do those in our next trial. And so, the more you can get each other excited and motivated to do stuff, the more it kind of just, goes out from there. So, all right, so those were the trainings that we did. So, starting in 2012, the circles, the responding to racism effectively, the implicit bias, and then, weaving into that implicit bias, the, specific, points during litigation, the, jury selection, plea negotiations, and stop motions.
Gina, do you want to take a few questions before you move on?
Sure.
We had a question from a viewer in Richmond asking, how should this work if there's a big disparity between the number of white people and the number of people of color in the office?
That's a good question. I don't think because of that it should stop you from trying to do training. I know I mentioned, that we were really careful about selecting facilitators, to have an equal number of, people of color and white people help with the facilitation and the training and developing of the training. Involve as many people as you can. And I don't think and I don't know if Virginia, if they're a statewide or county or, what it is, but just involve as many people as you can. You shouldn't let it stop you, is I guess the short answer is like, don't let it be like, oh, we probably don't have enough of a differing of perspectives to even go down this road. I would be like, no, don't do that. I mean, you got to go down this road. We have to go down this road. This is really important. This is a big issue. And whatever the makeup of your office is, you got to do it, and involve other people. We involved in the YWCA because they're experts. I mean, the Colleen Butler, who runs that program there, she's a white woman, and she knows a ton about this stuff. So I don't think it precludes anyone from going down this road. So don't let it discourage you, I guess.
Gina, you mentioned in passing a little bit there that judges also have their own biases. We have a question from a viewer asking, how would you use the sentencing judge's unconscious bias to illuminate the court to its own bias when it comes to sentencing? Okay, so
we addressing it at sentencing is not something that we've done yet at the SPD in Wisconsin in terms of training. What I would say at this point is, one of the things that we're doing right now, and in putting this unconscious bias or implicit bias training together, is we're starting to read. We have a group of people, again, this group of facilitators, again, like volunteering extra time, on top of their very busy daily, workloads, to read through all these social science articles, because there is a ton of stuff out there, a ton of studies that have been done that show like this is a real thing. This is not just like a made up thing like, oh, we think people are doing this. No, there is, the technology, brain scans, the medical technology today is such that it's a real thing, right? Like our brains just automatically go to the place of bias and stereotype. And so there's a ton of research out there. And so one of the things that we're encouraging staff to do in Wisconsin is, use that social science research in your sentencing memo or your brief or whatever it is, or in your argument, your bail argument or whatever it is. And so what we're doing is, because, again, time is, limited and these articles are really, really long, is we've got a group of people who are taking the time to read these articles and then trying to condense them down into like just a one-page sort of summary. This is the gist of the article. This was like sort of the study that was done. This is what it found, and this is how you can use it in your case. So
And Gina, when I went into the Wisconsin State Public Defender's training link website, you have racial disparity materials. There's a ton of articles. Are these
Yep.
articles that you're referencing?
Some of the articles that I'm referencing, yes, are there. The summaries that I'm talking about, we haven't posted yet because we're trying to get enough of them to put them out there. And the idea with the summaries is that, a lawyer can go in and find, their topic areas. So let's say it's sentencing, or it's, interpretation of ambiguous behavior during a stop or something, whatever that category is. And then they can read the summary, and then they, on their own, can decide, do I need to go in and read that whole, 75-page article and then somehow integrate it into my motion or my argument or whatever. So, but yes, so Colette, what you mentioned, the training division page, there's also at the Public Defender's website, our Racial Disparity Practice Coordinator also has a page, and some of the material on that page links over to our training page, but there's additional material at the Racial Disparity Practice Coordinator page, and I think it's like specialty, or at the top, I think it's like legal resources, and then the drop-down menu is like specialty practice, and then racial disparity, I think.
Yes.
Is how you get there.
It's really, I'm glad that you're saying this, because there's a wealth of knowledge and information on your website that I'm just as we're going through this and listening to you talk, there's links to a lot of great articles.
Yeah, and it's always evolving. I mean, it's, I know like some of the links might not be working right now because we're updating things, and we're, trying to organize things in a way that's, easy and intuitive for people to find stuff. But yeah, it's kind of like another place people can go to kind of, find stuff and find it sort of organized in categories. So, are there more questions right now, or?
There are.
Yeah, okay.
Can you speak to any strategies for getting resources, including specific funding to support this kind of work? So how do we get policy agency leaders to agree not just to prioritize the work, but to prioritize obtaining resources to support it?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
did you guys get any specific funding?
No, we didn't. And, when we partnered with the YWCA, they, we talked to them about, limited funding. We're a taxpayer-funded agency, and because we have this common goal, right? They were able to work with us in terms of, giving us, a discount to send our staff to the racial justice workshops, and then when they came in and did the facilitator training, they they charged us a rate that we could comfortably, pay. But again, I mean, we're just doing it all internal. It's, we haven't, in terms of developing, the training content itself, just kind of tapping into the knowledge that some of our staff already has, and then to the extent that we need to develop or increase our own knowledge, just taking that extra time, on the weekend or whatever it is, to just, study up and read up and talk to other people and attend other training, to really know more about the topic and to know enough about it and be comfortable enough to go in and do training and to talk about it with other people. So, yeah. So so I've spent time talking about the sort of what I would call like standalone training that we've done over the last 4 years, but it's not just that. We've been doing other things. This the racial justice topic and the importance of raising race in the context of our cases, and the importance of recognizing our implicit biases and making sure that they don't interfere in what we're doing with clients. Those things have been woven into other things that we do at the Wisconsin SPD, including we do this conference, 2-day conference every fall, and we are very deliberate about including sessions. It's a multi-track conference. We have 7 concurrent tracks going on at the same time over the 2-day period, and we're very deliberate about including sessions that relate to race. And so, for example, Jeff Robinson, who, like a lot of you probably know, Jeff Robinson came into our conference a couple of years ago and did, I think, 3 different sessions throughout the 2 days, on this topic. What we've done with our Trial Skills Academy, that's an annual 5-day program every spring. So I think we maybe 5-ish years ago, we decided, when we develop our case problem for Trial Skills Academy, every single time we're going to make the client a client of color. And we have made sure now that each year when we do our Trial Skills Academy that the person who does the lecture on voir dire incorporates into that lecture a component about the importance of raising race during jury selection. And then we also make sure that in our small groups on voir dire that each of our participants at some point asks the mock jurors, we bring in these volunteers from the community to act as the jurors, ask questions of the mock jury about race. And so we've woven it into there, and again, and not just sort of like accidental, but it's going to be woven in, and we're going to address it each year at that program. Every year before our 2-day conference, we have all of our agency managers from all over the state get together the day before, and we have a managers meeting. And over the last few years, we've incorporated a discussion about race into that meeting. And in fact, this year we've decided already that at our annual managers meeting in November, we're going to make the whole entire day focused on unconscious bias and how we as managers in our local offices, local communities, can educate others in the system about unconscious bias. And I have listed here the Criminal Justice Coordinating Councils. We have a lot of those in Wisconsin. I don't know if other states have these things, but I think we have 72 counties in Wisconsin, and I want to say more than half of the counties have these CJCCs, where it consists of all players in the criminal justice system. So you've got your public defender, a judge, a prosecutor, policymakers, social workers, court staff meet and get together and discuss policy and practice and procedure in their counties. And so we're telling our managers and giving our managers what they need to go into their CJCCs with information about unconscious bias and racial disparities and things that these CJCCs should be doing to address it. And then the data collection piece that I have there, we, as part of our intake process with clients, we ask them to identify which race, what race do they identify with. And we ask our staff to do that. Our court system does the same thing. We have a CCAP system in Wisconsin. It's like sort of the court database of all of the stuff that's happening in individual cases. The CCAP race data is not from the client or the defendant or the client themselves. It's just based on a visual appearance, and then the person entering it in just makes a determination on their own and what the person's race is. So it's not reliable. It's not accurate, right? So we have really emphasized with our staff, the importance of asking that question. And while for whatever reason you might feel uncomfortable asking your client that question, you can let your client know that the reason if they ask, that the reason you're asking that question is because we're using it to help you guys, and to help to deal with this the racial disparity problem in Wisconsin. So as part of doing these training programs, all the time we're really reminding our staff and emphasizing to our staff the importance of asking that question and getting that in there, because we need that data, right, if we're going to make these challenges and arguments. So that's also happening. Just a few things just to kind of keep in mind. If other organizations are looking to develop this kind of training or thinking about developing this kind of training, I talked a lot about selecting and training of facilitators. Getting the people, if you've got people within your agency who are interested in this work and have what it takes to be good at this work, that it kind of starts there. Colette, was there?
Yeah, no, Gina, we have another question too, similarly before you switch over. How has the Wisconsin State Public Defender incorporated this work into its recruitment, hiring, and retention practices to move forward the work of making public defense more diverse and reflective of the communities that we serve?
Okay, that's a really good question. It was something that I thought about earlier. In terms of our hiring process, we do now ask a question, if I'm understanding this question correctly. During the interview process for lawyers, we do have a question in there that relates specifically to what the candidate in the interview thinks about racial disparity, what their thoughts are on the racial disparity issue within the criminal justice system, and ideas that they might have to deal with it. And depending on the person's answer, you can kind of gauge where the person is at. And obviously, someone who recognizes that it's a problem and wants to deal with the problem, is someone who's like, yeah, that's that kind of person we want. Someone who answers that question differently might not be someone that we want at the agency. So right during that interview phase, we're making it known and letting our potential employees, potential lawyers for the agency know that this is an important thing, and that if you're going to come to work for the Wisconsin SPD, this is something that we really care about, and that that you're going to be expected to work with. In terms of retention and that kind of thing, I think I haven't really thought about this, but I think to the extent that we have people who work at the SPD who really care about this issue, knowing that their agency also cares about it and is devoting time and resources to address it, whether it's with training or trying to shape policy or whatever at the local CJCC level, or even within the state legislature, that kind of thing, to the extent that that we do that, and it helps retain people to stay. That kind of going back to that first question about combating racism one of the reasons you came to work for SPD. For me, the answer was no back in '92. That had nothing to do with why I chose to work for the Wisconsin SPD. But the honest part of that honest answer is it's one of the reasons I stay, because it is really important, and I think it's fabulous that our agency leadership, not only Nick back in 2008 when he created the team and the board did the resolution, but now Kelly, who's our current director, it's huge. It's really important, and so it's one of the reasons I stay, and it's probably, I think it's fair to say, it's probably a reason other people might stay as well. So. So other things to just keep in mind, input from a variety of people and groups. It kind of goes back to us looking to the YWCA of Madison, as a resource, and that we can tap into, and that they can help us, and your own people. People within your agency are going to know a lot of stuff about this and are doing great work already. We don't know day to day what the lawyer in Rhinelander, what motion they just did, and so the more we talk about it, and our racial and ethnic disparity practice coordinator gets out there and visits these local offices and finds out what people are doing, and people are sharing, and now people are sharing more and more and more, what they're doing, and these videos that we showed, at the training this spring, the lawyer in Milwaukee and his resisting case and what he did, and it's like, wow, it really kind of makes you think, okay, you know what, I do need to ask those extra questions. I do need to take that extra time to make sure that my worldview is not getting in the way of what I think might have been going on with my client. So and the staff stories thing, not only inspiring and giving people the courage to do things themselves, but really throwing yourself out there, okay? So one of the things that we told our facilitators and our trainers when we do all these trainings, it's not just me, there's a group of us that goes around and do this. It's like, you guys, we got to share our own stuff. We got to tell, the group, if we expect them to really look inward and think about what they're doing, we got to do the same thing. And so, I tell lots of stories about things that I've done that I'm not proud of. And then that gets people to think them, for themselves too, like, oh wow, you know what, I'm not sure that, why am I doing that? Why am I crossing the street? What am I doing? And then the last thing, we've kind of started slow, and kind of built up. We didn't just go in there and be like, okay, today we're going to talk about how we're all, have these really horrible, racial biases, unconscious biases. But, kind of starting slow and getting people first comfortable with those discussion circles and then kind of moving up from there. So I do have just a few, okay, so next steps, private bar. We haven't at this point really gotten our private bar lawyers. We have about 1,200 lawyers on our private bar list, and we are now talking about, how can we get this training out to them? The implicit bias training that we just did is so interactive. We've thought about, can we create some videos? Can we do things like that and have our private bar, tap into those to at least start learning about this stuff? And, so we're starting to talk about how to, get our private bar involved in this training as well. And then back to what, the question about the sentencing. So, we decided this spring that we'd focus on jury selection and stop motions, but we want to focus on bail and sentencing next, and kind of really honing in on, what is the law in that regard, and, what's the data that's going to be needed, what are the arguments that we can make, and pulling those resources together. The thing I wanted to end with, because, so we've talked about, what training has the Wisconsin Public Defender done? Well, you know what, there's, so you're all going back to your own, offices, and you think about what your office can do, but there's things that we just as individual people can do every day. And the first thing that I would offer would be the implicit association test. So if you just Google that, it's at Harvard's website. It's been out there for a while. There's IATs on a whole, I think there's 100 different categories that you can do an IAT on, from, your biases that you have with, weight, gender, religion, whatever. Well, there's one specifically on race, and it takes about maybe 10-ish minutes to do. It's something that requires focus, so, do it in a quiet place. If you've got, don't do it at home when your kids are around, or don't do it at the office when your phone's ringing. Just kind of find 10 minutes of quiet and focus. And what it does is it basically measures your association between, people and qualities. So good, bad, favorable, unfavorable, black, white. I'm not doing a good job of explaining it, but just go in, take the test, and I will share my experience. I first took it about 1.5 years or so ago, and what it showed me was that I had a moderate preference for European Americans, white people, over African Americans, black people. All right, and I was like, what? No, I don't like this. So I took it again, and Judge Bennett shares in his video, same exact thing. He was like, no way, this test is bogus. No, it's legit. Again, it's a real thing. It's not just this made up thing. It's legit. It's real. Okay. And so I took it again, and had the same result. Well, I took it a couple weeks ago, so 1.5 years passes. I took it a couple of weeks ago because I was curious. I was like, I wonder what would happen now. Well, I took it a couple weeks ago, and the results said that I now have a moderate preference for African Americans over European Americans. It's like, okay, that's interesting. I found it very interesting, and I wonder if it's all this training that we've been doing that has sort of changed my brain, has changed those automatic associations, those automatic reactions that my brain makes, like you saw in that Silent Beats video. People look at people and they make these instant judgments, right? And doing awareness training and doing things like the IAT and other things that I'm going to share in a minute can change those associations, all right? So go do the IAT. 10 minutes, that's all it takes. Go read Song's article. Unlike these academic research or social science research articles that are really hard to read and oh, I don't understand what they're saying, this Song's article is great. I mean, it's easy to read. It's 20-ish pages long, and it really, really, really makes you think.
It's on your website too.
Is it on our website?
It is. When you go into the racial disparity in the training unit on the Wisconsin State Public Defender's website, there's a link to Song's article right there.
Okay, good. Awesome. All right. Okay, so another thing you can do, go, and this is one of the things that Song talks about in an article, go look at your last 20 cases that you took to trial. Go look at the last 20 cases that you hired an investigator for, or had an investigator work on. And then look at the races of those clients and see if you notice anything about that. Were all those clients white? Was it, a mixture of white clients and clients of color? What was it? And start to really look at your own practices. Where are you devoting, are you devoting more time to one client over another client? And why is that? Really thinking about, what's going on here? What am I doing? If-then plans, what are these? All right, so I'm going to share a story here. This is a story that I've shared in all of our trainings. What is an if-then plan? So what it is you think of a scenario. If this happens, then I'm going to do something else. If the current then is something that is showing, bias, right? So several years ago, I had to park my car every morning at my husband's work. And then it was like a 10-minute walk from where I parked my car to get to my office. And I noticed that every morning there were 3 African-American men that would be walking down the sidewalk toward me. And it's like 8 o'clock in the morning. And I didn't notice until the actual day that I noticed that when I would see these African-American men walking toward me, I would cross over to the other side of the street and walk down the other sidewalk. And the day that I noticed that I was doing that, I told myself, you know what, if this happens tomorrow, if these guys are walking toward me tomorrow, then I'm not going to cross the street. I mean, why am I crossing the street? This is stupid. Like, I didn't even know I was doing it until I knew I was doing it, right? I just, noticed it one day. So that was my if-then plan. If this happens tomorrow, then I'm going to stay on the same side. And so that's what I did. So, yeah, sure enough, the next day, same thing happens. And, okay, Gina, don't cross the street. Didn't cross the street. Fine, So, or the, I'm not going to lock my doors or whatever, the scenario that we had. Just different things like that. If my young black male client is charged with a drug crime, I'm not going to, then I'm not going to automatically think guilty. Those kinds of things. So just kind of think about, really be aware of what you're doing and thinking, and then coming up with a different plan. So that's something else you can do. Okay, here's my plug for mindfulness. Colette knows this. So those of you who know what, mindfulness practice, mindful meditation, other mindfulness practices, again, this is not just me saying, hey, this is a cool thing, try this. No, again, research and science shows that the more one engages in, mindfulness practices, be it meditation, yoga, whatever it is, the more their brain is able to not react from an emotional, automatic place, but rather a thoughtful place. So again, I'm probably not explaining this very well, but what mindfulness does, mindfulness meditation, mindfulness practices do is develop your thinking, thoughtful part of your brain, which is also known as your slow brain, your prefrontal cortex, right? People that otherwise what happens is your fast brain, your amygdala, your emotional reactionary part of your brain is the thing that kicks into gear, okay? And that's where your these unconscious biases come from, is that emotional fast part of your brain where you see something and you have this automatic thought in your head. And so the more mindful you are, the more you're able to sort of interrupt that automatic, fast brain and engage that slow, thoughtful brain where you can be like, hey, wait, why am I crossing the street? Why am I locking my door? Just automatically. But wait, stop, think, and respond, and have a thoughtful response. So not only can it help with our own implicit biases, but it also can be very helpful in the courtroom. So when that juror says something and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe they just said that, or that judge or the DA or whoever says something that's just so horrific, and you want to just start screaming and yelling, and that's not going to be effective, being mindful allows you that ability to come up with a very thoughtful, planned response in that moment. So that's another thing, just to kind of keep in mind. And you can Google and find just a ton of stuff out there.
And you also have an article about it listed on the Wisconsin
sure
State Public Defender's Office called Mindfulness Meditation Reduces Implicit Race and Age Bias, the Rule of Reduce Automatic, I can't even say, the response of that. So it's on your website as well. So thank you
See, I know,
for
there's
making
a
this
ton.
a great website.
So yeah, and that's if you take anything away from this, it's oh my gosh, there is a ton of stuff out there. You just gotta take the time to read it and study up and to want to do it, right? You have to have that motivation to really want to do it and then to take the time. So that's all that I have.
Yeah, we actually have a couple more follow-up questions.
Okay.
If you have time.
Sure.
Regarding, back again to recruitment and hiring processes and that sort of thing, are you incorporating this at all to help try to recruit and retain not just people who are interested in racial justice, but actually people of color?
Yes, and I don't have numbers with me, but I can say that at the Wisconsin SPD, we are very conscious about hiring a diverse workforce and to make sure that our agency's staff is reflective of the clients that we serve. And if people are interested in knowing more about that, I mean, I could, if people want to email me and are just curious to know what those numbers are, our HR office, our trial division director, I know we keep stats on that. We share those stats with our board of directors when we meet with them. If people are interested in knowing what they are, but yes, we make sure that we do that. That's again very deliberate.
We have Jeff Scheer, who's one of the education and strategic planning manager for the Department of Public Advocacy from the Kentucky State Public Defender's Office. Wanted to share two things with you. Was complimenting you, Gina, on the webinar, but one to asking public defenders that are listening to please feel free to join the Public Defense Zen Facebook page, and also that Jeff has recently listened to a podcast on being with, and I'm going to spell this out, Mahzarin, Mazrin, Banaji, who is one of the people that is behind the Harvard implicit bias test. And so it's a webinar, a podcast that talks about the difference in being mindful and present. Mm-hmm. So I can maybe load up that link as well.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. All right. Any other questions?
I think that's it, and I thank you all for listening to the webinar, and thank you so much, Gina, for this very, very helpful webinar on this very important issue.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.